Welcome. It's nice to see you all again.
Nice to see you.
And I have the pleasure of now introducing Evan Weiner, who's had an amazing career that we would all be envious of. He's had extensive experience in radio and in television, in newspapers as a columnist.
Still working on podcasts.
And podcasts,
Yeah.
and a sports commentator, and
And I speak on cruise ships, or used to speak on cruise ships as well, till COVID-19. So I'm taking you to Bermuda on Celebrity or Royal Caribbean. How many of you done the Cape Liberty Celebrity or Royal Caribbean trip? Did you like it? Liked it? So did you spend the 3 days overnight in Bermuda or just go in and out for 8 hours? So anyway, thank you for coming, and thank you, Ann and John, for inviting me back. I did a Zoom talk last year here, and it's good to see people. Although I have been out, I have 4 shots, I've been out and about for about a year at various places, and but it's nice to see old faces that I haven't seen in a couple of years. That is King's Wharf. Or as my comic friend, Max Docelli, who works on cruise ships, used to call it King Barth. And that is, for the most part, if you're sailing out of Cape Liberty, that's where you end up in King's Wharf. Bermuda is a British island, and it's known basically for pink sand beaches. Anybody been to Elbow Beach here? Horseshoe Beach? So you know, you've seen the terrain there, and you're not allowed to take the sand. Right? How many of you taken the sand? I won't tell if you don't tell. I won't tell. Anyway, it is Britain's oldest and smallest territory, and it's one of the most affluent. A lot of banking that takes place there. It's a British overseas territory, has its own government except for external affairs and defense. Bermuda's got a really strange history. Nobody lived there. It was seen by a Portuguese guy by the name of Bermudez, and he saw it, claimed it for Spain, and said, "Yeah, what do we want this for?" It was pretty much an empty area, as far as we know, about 5 centuries ago. And that's another view from King's Wharf, and you go right out there and you head back to New York as you make the left turn when you get out there. St. George. You can play pool on the beach at St. George. That is the oldest capital, European capital, I should say, in North America, and that's been around since the 17th century, and you can go swimming and play pool at the same time. America's Cup, the boat race, the yacht race was there in 2017, and that is Horseshoe Beach, and Glass Beach. Anybody been to Glass Beach? Oh, you haven't been there. I got a piece of glass in my house from Glass Beach. I shouldn't be telling you this, should I? Right? I shouldn't be telling you this because Glass Beach is the property of Wetco and remains open and accessible for the enjoyment of all residents and visitors. It's unlawful to remove or take any items off this beach, in particular the natural sea glass. If you steal it, you're depriving those who come after you. Persons who choose to remove such items, and they've removed the M from the items, are liable for prosecution. I don't think anybody's ever been prosecuted. And I think there are a lot of tourists, like me, who have a piece of glass in their house, so beware. Bermuda is only 21 square miles. There are no roads in Bermuda, or no roads that are main roads. They're all one-lane roads, and you get around by buses in Bermuda for the most part, or you'll pay an arm and a leg for a taxi. And it'll take you the same time as you get on the bus going from one end of the island to the other. And actually, Bermuda is on top of a sea volcano. It's a crater. That's basically what it is. Includes 6 main islands. There are 120 others. It's one of the 9 smallest places in the world in total land area. And there are some of the islands. If you're going to Hamilton and you take the ferry from King's Wharf instead of the bus, you'll see all the islands. And by the way, a lot of rich people live in Bermuda, an awful lot of rich people, including the former mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, who spent many a weekend in Bermuda while he was the mayor of New York City. And you can see where his house is, and there are a whole bunch of others, and so all these really rich people live in Bermuda. Bermuda creates its own laws, including those on citizenship, commerce, custom duties, employment, finance, health, insurance, investments, hospitalization, immigration, taxation, trade, and welfare. How many of you who have been to Bermuda have ever gone to a supermarket in Bermuda?
Oh, gosh, yes.
Oh gosh, yes. My wife loves to go to supermarkets. We go on all these cruises, go all these places. She wants to see what the prices are.
Right.
Bermuda is 600 miles off the Carolina coast. They could get items from the United States, but it's controlled by about 5 families, and they like to keep the prices high.
Oh,
high
God, yes.
or high. Did you buy anything?
This is 1990.
Okay.
A
30 years
package
ago.
of potato chips was about $9.50.
It's probably 20 bucks now,
Yeah.
or more. But they import all their foods. By the way, Bermuda has no natural water supply. They catch the water on their roofs and
Yeah,
use
yeah.
that water. So they have no natural water supply there either. Tourism. So would you go to Bermuda under normal circumstances? Would you? Probably not. Do you know who actually cut his teeth in radio in Bermuda? Cousin Brucey! Cousin Brucey.
Bruce Morrow.
What?
Bruce Morrow.
Bruce
He's
Bruce
back on the air.
Morowitz. Bruce Morowitz.
He's back on the air.
Yeah, he's on the air on WABC. In
Right.
fact, my buddy Mitch Levy, who was the teenage disc jockey at WINS, he was 16 years old, 1958, introduced Bruce Morowitz at that time to New York radio. He went to Bermuda after he was at WINS and then came back to WABC. But he's the only guy I ever knew who went to Bermuda on business, and I really don't know him. I met him once or twice, but Beatles were there. They did help there. There were about 65,000 residents, and prior to COVID, there were about 550,000 visitors a year, most of them on cruise ships. The cruise season lasts from about the first week of May to the end of October. And there are 3 ports. One is King Wharf, the other is St. George, and the other is in Hamilton. It's close to the United States, and in the 1950s and 1960s, there were a lot of people from this area who spent their honeymoon in Bermuda because it's only about an hour and a half from plane. Toronto is about 2 hours away. That's pretty far for tourists, except for London, but then again, it is a British island. You can see Miami, Orlando, Atlanta, Charlotte, Baltimore, Washington, BWI Airport, Dulles, Philadelphia, the 3 airports in New York, Boston, Toronto, Halifax, Quebec City are all easy shots, except people in Quebec City end up in Hallandale, Florida for the winter. Golf. This is one of the reasons people actually go. And you go on cruise ships and you see these people with their clubs, they go golfing. And Bermuda is one of the better golf areas in the world. Swimming, well, that's outside of St. George. And the Crystal Cave, if you want to go see stalactites and stalagmites, there you go there. And the Botanical Gardens, which nobody talks about. But the Botanical Gardens is a museum there. And Tom runs it. A guy I know down there, Tom runs the museum, and every time I go there, it's an art museum. It's actually a really nice art museum. I'll show you a picture or two from there. But there's a Botanical Gardens there. That's really interesting and really nice. And they have the same trees that they do in Hawaii. Oh, we were there for an agricultural show. Take a look at that guy. Take a look at that guy. It's a chicken. It's a chicken. You go to this agricultural show and everybody outdoes everybody else. But I thought that that was probably the nicest looking chicken. And by the way, it's wearing a garter. I don't know if you can see it, but it's wearing a green garter. The agricultural show.
Does he wear underwear?
I didn't check if they had underwear. Bermuda shorts. How many have worn Bermuda shorts? It's a big thing there. That's a big thing. And they're the most famous attire of men in Bermuda. And they're worn with a jacket and a tie and knee socks. And they're quite popular in business and social settings. And they have a season too, from May to the first week of November. By the way, Bermuda is in a hurricane zone, but hurricanes usually sideswipe Bermuda. They've been hit with a few hurricanes. Down by St. George, there's an area that's been totally destroyed by a hurricane, but hurricanes don't hit them that often because it's so small. I was talking to a woman about 8-9 years ago, and there was hurricane warnings, and we were getting out early because of hurricane warnings. She said, I'll believe it when I see it. You know, they issue these hurricane warnings all the time, and sure enough, they missed that hurricane, so she wasn't even prepared. You haven't lived till you see cranes pick boats out like that, throw them on the side of like in King Wharf for hurricanes. This is a guy who probably, this is a guy that Bermuda is named after. His name is Juan de Bermudez. He was Portuguese. He's sailing and sailing, and he sees this stuff. And he reaches there and looks around and says, there's nothing here. But he might have got there in 1505, and the islands are named after him. He claimed the islands for the Spanish Empire. They were not all that interested. By the way, got a question for you. Barbados, right, which is off the beat track a little bit. Do you know what Barbados means? It means bearded men in Spanish. When the Spanish got there, they looked at it and said, hey, they all have beards. Well, we call it Barbados. And they did. But it's English. It's English. And every Friday down at King's, every Wednesday and Friday at King's Wharf, they have the history of Bermuda. And this guy's been playing that part for years and years. He also has another role in Bermuda. And that woman has been playing that part for years and years. And she has another role, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. 1609. The English Virginia Company, which had gone to Jamestown, permanently settled Bermuda in the aftermath of a hurricane. They were on this ship called the Sea Venture, and it's not like the cruise ships of today. I was in the North Sea on a cruise ship. We got hit with 100-mile-an-hour winds. It just stopped. But we didn't really have any damage. But can you imagine being on a transatlantic ship and getting hit with a hurricane? So the crew, and I'm not sure if it was Gilligan and the skipper, well, they shipwrecked it, right? They got shipwrecked, right? The Minnow got shipwrecked. Well, they kind of get shipwrecked, and they end up on a reef to protect their ship, which is sinking, and then they landed on shore. The first English colony that was successful in North America was in Jamestown. And the reason they went to Jamestown, they had some good scouts out there, was a lot of trees. And it was a problem in Europe because most of the trees were cut down in Europe by this point. And so they needed trees to do things like build ships so they could go to war. So that's why they were in Virginia, to get the lumber. Shakespeare. What's Shakespeare doing here? Or someone. Shakespeare write those things, or did somebody else write the things since he owned the Globe Theater and said, it's mine? I'll never know. Shakespeare has an interesting part in history. What's the news on the Jamestown? Like, what's the news on the Rialto? The news of the shipwreck inspired Shakespeare writing of the Tempest. In the play, Ariel makes reference to the still vexed Bermoothes. Most of the voyagers did eventually reach Jamestown the following year or two on ships built locally, and Bermuda still builds some ships. And that begins the beginning of Bermuda as a permanent settlement. But it's not there for tourism, not at all. Bermuda was included in 1612 in the third charter of the Virginia Company, and 60 English settlers were sent there to colonize the islands. Joining the three, Gilligan, the skipper, maybe the professor, who remained from the Sea Venture party. Ginger had to be in the movies. Oh, there's that guy again. Same guy. He's the town crier. So there he is in Georgetown. During the week he does something else, and once a week he's in Georgetown. He's the town crier. I got to know him a little bit as well. I got to talk to him, and he's been doing the town crying for about 50 years or so, unless he goes on vacation. I said, where do you go on vacation? He says, I go to New York. I said, what time of the year? During the winter. When I should. It's nice and cold. Anyway, in 1612, the English began the intentional settlement of Bermuda, and there was a ship called the Plow. Georgetown was settled later that year and was designated as the first capital of Bermuda. It's the oldest continually inhabited English town in the New World. Quebec City is probably just a little older because the French got there in the early 1600s, a few years earlier in Nova Scotia and also in Quebec City. That church was never completed. It's been sitting there for years and years and years. It's become a tourist attraction because it's never been completed. It's just got walls up there, and actually that is the milepost. You look at that and you know you're going to the beach. Bermuda in the 16th century, there were slaves. About 1670, an Indian, maybe a Carib, and a person of African descent, possibly a slave, were sent to Bermuda. They might have gone there as pearl divers, except there are no oysters, so there are no pearls. The colony was administered until 1684 by the Virginia Company, and then its successor, the Company of the Plantation of the Somers Islands, which it was called. Oh, there's that guy again. There's that guy again. I wonder if he's going to call my wife a wench. It's possible. It's possible. The people who lived there during the colony received many immigrants during that period. And they had enslaved people there. The passengers from the shipwrecks, there were a lot of shipwrecks, stayed there. So the crews of captured enemy vessels. Native Americans and Africans were transported there in the slave trade. Irish and Scottish political prisoners were sold into servitude and transported to Bermuda. Oh, there she is. She was a wench. There she is. She's being dumped. Oh, do you know who dumped her, by the way? I did, and 8 others. They said, you, come over here. And she's on the edge of that, see, she's on the edge of the that piece of wood, right? And so the 8 guys go on here, and we go up and down, teasing her. And then we go, and then she's dumped. Talked to her afterwards. She said, you know, when you work in Bermuda during the summer, it's 95 degrees every day. And she said, I love getting dunked. It's the best job because it cools you off real fast. By the way, do you know what her crime was, the wench? She spoke with an evil tongue. She gossiped.
Oh.
She gossiped, and so she was dumped. 1684, the colony becomes administered by the Crown. The colonial capital goes from St. George to Hamilton in 1815. Slavery was outlawed in Bermuda and the rest of the British Empire in 1833. Bermuda has a very strange relationship with the United States. It's only about 650 miles off the coast. They have a relationship with the United States during the American Revolution, the War of 1812, the Civil War, and World War II. The American Revolution. See, I'm in Pittsburgh one day, and I see General George Washington, and being a reporter that I am, I wanted to know what George had in mind, because he went up to the Pittsburgh area around 1770, and he's looking to recruit Native Americans, people he knew from his army days back in 1750, and he wants to get the English out. So he's looking to get people on his side to start the American Revolution starts. It's a very, very complicated relationship that Bermuda has with the United States. Remember timber, right? Jamestown, they came to take the timber to build the ships. Well, American timber was one of the enablers of the Britain's ascendancy to maritime supremacy. And by 1776, the year of the American Revolution, a significant part of Britain's merchant fleet was made up of American, actually colonial, the southern colonists, and they built ships. So, you know, there's the flag of Bermuda, there's the flag of Britain, and, you know, Britain expects that Bermuda is going to help them, right? They're going to help them, they're going to help them, they're going to beat these American colonists, and they'll be able to claim at least the 13 colonies and keep them together with the northern colonies. Well, the Continental Congress was going to have none of this. And they decided, we're going to ban trade with Great Britain, Ireland, and the West Indies after September 10th, 1775. Now, an embargo would mean the collapse of their intercolonial commerce, which meant Bermuda, which was sending stuff over to the colonies.
Okay.
So there's a family called the Tuckers, and they meet in May of 1775 with 8 other parishioners, and they say, you know what? Let's go see what's going on in America. Let's go see what's going on with the Continental Congress. This is 1775, and they want to go to talk to people in July. That's where George Washington showed up in his old army uniform. Brits, of course. Hey, by the way, was George Washington a traitor or not?
To England he was.
Was he a traitor?
To England.
To England. Ben Franklin?
Yep.
All those guys were traitors.
Yep. I was born on his birthday.
Anyway, oh, George, February 22nd. Anyway, so Henry Tucker is going to Philadelphia. And he says, wait a minute. There's a clause in this ban which allowed exchange of American goods for military supplies. God, some treachery here. Guy wants to keep his money. Some treachery. So 3 American ships, actually they weren't American at that point, they were the southern colonists, or the colonists, sailed to Bermuda. And on August 14th of 1775, they get 100 barrels of gunpowder taken from the Bermudan magazine. They're loaded onto these vessels. Nobody knows who did it. You walk through St. George, you go through the history of all that. On October 2nd, the Continental Congress said, hey, Bermuda, we're going to do trades with you. Why? She did something treacherous. We like that. So Bermuda is, they got, the trade ban is gone. But internationally, Bermuda acquires this reputation for being disloyal. And in late 1775, over in London, the British Parliament is really, really upset. You know, they passed all these things against Massachusetts and the colonists and all that. Didn't work. They're still in rebellion. So we're going to also add Bermuda to our list. And it's called the Prohibitory Act. And that prevents trade with the rebelling American colonies. And London says sends the HMS Scorpion. And they're going to keep watch over the island. And basically what they're going to do is starve the people. The war breaks out. 1776. They wouldn't be flying all those flags in 1776 in Hamilton. After France gets into the war in 1778, when Ben Franklin goes over to Paris and says, help! And they do because France hated England. Bermuda was refortified. 91 French and American ships were captured in 1778 and 79. And the population is about ready to starve. There are no supplies on the island. Bermuda trade was severely hampered by the combination of the Royal Army, the British garrison, and loyal privateers. Got guys working the other side of the street. Famine strikes the island in 1779. Well, the Loyalists. What about the Loyalists? Well, the Loyalists, of course, are loyal to Britain. The death of George Brewery in 1780, and he was the governor. Turns it over to his son, George Jr., which reminds me of Liberace. I wish my brother George was here. See, some people, if I told that joke today to a crowd of 20-year-olds, they wouldn't know what I was talking about.
Liberace was.
Yeah. Under George Jr., smuggling was stopped, and the Bermuda colonial government was populated with like-minded loyalists. Well, Britain and the United States agreed to end hostilities after Yorktown in 1781 and signed a treaty in 1783. So what happens after the Revolutionary War to this place? Well, actually, after the Revolutionary War, that place didn't exist quite yet. Well, you build the dockyards. Napoleon battled Britain for military, political, and economic superiority in Europe, and they closed continental ports to British trade. Napoleon also unleashed a storm of privateers from the French West Indies, not too far away, and they wanted to cripple the British trade in the New World. Oh no, did he have an itch? Must have had an itch. There he is. He was not 5'4". He's actually bigger, but yeah, they said he was. 1881, or rather 1811, the work begins on the Royal Naval Dockyard on the Ireland site, or King Wharf in the West Chain, and that's going to serve as the island's principal naval base guarding Western Atlantic Ocean shipping lanes. To guard the dockyard, the British Army built up a large British garrison and heavily fortified the territory. Well, that's the War of 1812, and that's 1814 when the Brits decided to burn down, wasn't known as the White House in those days, it was the Executive Mansion. And this is in retaliation because Americans burnt down government buildings in Ontario. So they decided, hey, you know what, you did this to us, we'll do this to you. And they did. Goodbye, Halifax. The Brits had a lot of, and they still do because, well, that's actually Canada. Behind the bridge is where the United States and the Canadians have joint armed forces meetings, and but they go to Staples first to get their equipment, right? But anyway, so goodbye Halifax. Halifax, you know, during the Revolutionary War, George Washington could have gone after Nova Scotia and would have gotten it without too many problems. Instead, he went after Quebec. And Washington's reasoning was, why spend money on bullets for there when we could spend it somewhere else? Nova Scotia almost, and I do talk about this, Nova Scotia almost was the 14th colony. And that would have helped in the War of 1812. But the Brits decide, you know, Halifax may not be a good place for us because the Americans could bomb us. Let's go down to Bermuda. Hello, dockyards. It's built. And we'll help the Brits and we'll start arming our guys to invade the United States from Bermuda. And that's exactly what they did. The British attacks on Washington, D.C. and the Chesapeake were planned and launched from Bermuda. That's where the headquarters was for the Royal Navy's North American station, and they got it out of Halifax, so they bring it down there. As you know, the War of 1812 ends with Andrew Jackson taking a little trip down the mighty Mississippi, and it was a big hit for Johnny Horton in 1959, and nobody ever remembers Johnny Horton these days. Civil War at Stone Mountain outside of Atlanta in Cobb County. And that's Robert E. Lee is there, Jackson is there, and Jefferson Davis is on that mountain. And locally, that's a minority majority. Stone Mountain is now minority living there. And they're trying to figure out how do we counteract that statue, and talking about putting Martin Luther King, who was from Georgia, on the other side of it, among others. George Washington Carver. Civil War, Bermuda was a staging base and a stopping point for the Confederate blockade runners on their runs to and from the southern states. So they were getting supplies sent there to England, and the Confederates would pick up the supplies. And the only problem was to evade the Union naval vessels. But they got a lot of shipments from Bermuda during that. The blockade runners were able to transport the essential war goods from England and deliver cotton back to England. Well, eventually the Civil War is over, and eventually the Brits and the Americans say, let's be friends. Why can't we be friends? And they become friends. Although England ran Canada till 1931, and there was always in Canada plans drawn up to invade the United States or to repel an invasion of the United States till about 1931-32. World War I comes around, and we're all friends now because we're fighting Germany. The dockyard vessels were supposed to dominate the American coastline in the West Indies. It had to protect Allied merchant shipping the length and breadth of the Atlantic. Additionally, the vessels had to track down German surface raiders. So here Bermuda is again on America's side, after not being on America's side during the War of 1812 and the Civil War, but they were there during World War I to help the Americans. How many of you packed your bags and went somewhere, like to Bermuda? I know you went to Bermuda. That's part of Tom's museum, the art museum. And I looked, I said, Tom, that's a broken down suitcase. That's all it is. He said, yeah, but look at the tag. It says New York to Bermuda. And it's on a cruise line. And tourism starts during the Great Depression. Bermuda became a popular destination for Americans and Canadians and British tourists by sea. The United States Smoot-Hartley Tariff Act of 1930 led to the demise of Bermuda's once thriving agricultural export trade to the United States. And they said, okay, you know what? We'll send tourists over there. Why don't you develop something there? And they did. Alternate source of income. So your bags are all packed and you're ready to go, right? You're ready to go. And there are flights that have started between the United States and Bermuda. Imperial Airlines and Pan Am begin operations, flying boat service, as they called it, from New York and Baltimore to Darrell's Island in Bermuda. And that's where the Americans say, hey, wait a minute, it's a great place. It's still warm here in October. It's warm here in early May. Go golfing, go swimming. It's a great place. Let's go. In 1939, a 99-year lease was granted by the UK to the US for land bases at St. David's Island and Morgan and Tucker Islands. So Bermuda is more than just a tourism stop. It becomes a stop in terms of possible war, because remember, World War II starts on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, and the Americans wouldn't get involved until December 7th, 1941. Warwick Camp in Warwick Parish was fortified to help defend the dockyards again against potential German raiders. There were German boats right off Long Island, too, during that time. By 1941, the Americans established a military presence in Bermuda. That guy's not wearing Bermuda shorts. Yeah, just noticed that. The U.S. Navy begins operating air patrols from the island, mostly with VJ-15 unit aircraft. Bermuda becomes a wartime forming up point for convoys numbering hundreds and hundreds of ships heading out to Europe. Well, the war ends in 1945, and, well, what do we got? Just for fun, come to Bermuda. Look, 1946, I'm actually doing a talk on 1946 today. The baby boomer era starts. And after the war, people are encouraged, spend the money you saved up during World War II. Go out and have a good time. Don't worry about things. War is over. One of the places to go to Bermuda. You'll have a good time. March 1946, tourism ads about Bermuda begin appearing in American magazines, which were a big deal in those days, including, this is a dream beyond time, a dream in which this minute, this hour, this golden day, this magic night, should I break into this magic moment, the song, will endure forever. This is Bermuda, where dreams are even better. And it becomes a honeymoon spot. Take some business away from Niagara Falls. 1948, regularly scheduled commercial airline service begins, and the tourism peak hits in the 1960s and 1970s. St. George, where the town crier dumps the lunch, the first capital. It's made a special historic area. Development was strictly regulated, so the original character of the town remained largely intact. Oh, there he is. She's being sentenced. She's being sentenced. And then the guy in blue is the town crier. He's the one who announced, you're going in there. And if you notice, her hands are tied. So she's going on, she's going to be going on to the, and that's when, my wife's taking all these pictures because she somehow figures out, they're going to pick you to dump her. And we did. St. George lynch dunking for gossip. For gossip. Hamilton, oh, Gosling's, Rums. Ever go to Gosling's? That's the big company down there, Gosling's. Hamilton is the capital of Bermuda, founded in 1790, incorporated in 1793. Succeeded historic Georgetown as the capital in 1815, and in 1897 was raised to city status. To encourage business and employment, it was made a free port in 1956. Let me say a couple things about Hamilton. Hamilton waterfront is fine. Walking down to the Botanical Gardens is fine if you go to Hamilton. Just don't go 4 blocks north of the where the ferries drop you off. That's really a rugged neighborhood, a really rugged neighborhood. But you're okay within that area. The dockyard, again, that's they're building up the dockyard now because the cruise ships go there, and they want people to go stay in the dockyard. They don't want people to go necessarily down to Hamilton, but there's nothing to do in the dockyard. There's really nothing to do. You got half a mall, you got a couple beaches there, and you got the cruise ships. So what are we going to do with the dockyard? 1951, the Royal Navy dockyard is gone. It becomes like Ellis Island, it becomes a ghost town, no man's land. It had been on operation since 1809. And Britain hands over the military property to Bermuda. Bermuda says, well, what are we going to do with this? What? We don't know. Bermuda did become the vacation spot, but it was by plane at that point. You just hop over, you play golf, get tan, sip rum, swizzles, at Elbow Beach Hotel, which was a big deal in the 1960s and 70s. But one thing that Bermuda didn't have, that some of the islands south of it, in the old British West Indies had, is gambling. Gambling. And in 1958 or 59, St. Martin's, both the French side and the Dutch side, decide, hey, we're going to build things up. And of course, people were going to Havana until 1960. And Havana, of course, or 59 rather, in Havana, of course, it's run by the mafia. So there's lots of gambling down there. So they're in competition with Havana, St. Martin's, and some other islands that would basically, Royal Caribbean started up their cruise lines. It's called Royal Caribbean for a reason, because that's where their cruises went, to the Caribbean islands. And they thought, hey, you know what? There's a lot of stuff going on here. People are going to be cool with that. Jonathan Winters, remember him?
Yeah.
Jonathan Winters was actually employed by the Bermuda Tourism Agency. And the only reason I know that is going to that museum that Tom runs, the art museum. And they have this constant loop of Jonathan Winters. It's about a 20-minute loop where he's golfing, and everything, of course, is done because he's a comedian. Like, he golfs and falls down, and here he is in, he's in lock, stock, and barrel, right? So here he is, Jonathan Winters. It's 1963, and they chose him to host Passage to Bermuda, half-hour promotional trade film produced by the Islands Trade Development Board. And what they did with this, if they could throw it on TV. But mostly it went to travel agents. And the travel agents showed it to people. And they said, hey, look, this is what you could do here. And Jonathan Winters and a whole lot of top-flight entertainment actually performed in Bermuda in the 1960s. That's what they were counting on. No gambling, which is a problem. go out to Las Vegas. But that's who they were competing with, Las Vegas and the Caribbean islands. It was widely shown in the movie theaters, US and Canadian TV, in service club meetings. Passage to Bermuda was an effort to shake up the island's staid marketing. People are coming here for their honeymoons, that's not a problem. We need more than people coming for their honeymoons. We want people to play golf here. We want them to see the entertainment, and we figured Jonathan Winters, at that point, at the height of his popularity, would draw people in. Oh yeah, that's where he was, by the way. Same place. That is in St. George, and they moved that a little bit, but that's the place where Jonathan Winters was.
Is he wearing his Bermuda shorts?
Those are not Bermuda shorts. Those are just regular old shorts, not Bermuda shorts. And the Caribbean competition, that's Phillipsburg and St. Martin's, which constantly gets ripped apart by hurricanes. By the end of the 1970s, though, international business had surpassed tourism as the dominant sector of the Bermuda economy. Banking, 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 banking. The Bank of Bermuda would become HSBC. HBC is pulled out of the United States now, but it was the Bank of Bermuda, HSBC, and banking. So Bermuda de-emphasized tourism in the 1990s because they weren't getting any gambling. Cruise ships were going there, but Bermuda is kind of an odd stop from New York or Cape Liberty or New York, because not Carnival, a Norwegian goes from Manhattan down there. So it's a good stop for New York. It's a good stop for Baltimore. But you're not going to go from Miami up there. Although I did Tampa, Key West, Bermuda, transatlantic, and ended up in the Azores. So that was a stop because they had to give us a stop or we'd be on the water for 9 straight days. But they decided, you know what, let's get the businessmen in here and let them spend money here. And yeah, we'll keep some of the tourism, but it's not going to be the predominant industry anymore. Bermuda is an offshore financial center. They dump money in Bermuda, and nobody knows how much money is dumped. According to the Foote Report, Bermuda is the 2nd largest captive insurance domicile and 3rd largest reinsurance center in the world. Again, HSBC was rather dominant there. In fact, it was dominant after the Bank of Bermuda. And behind there is the kiosk that you go into to get your tickets to go on the ferry or the bus into Hamilton. But 2008, there's a big problem. If you remember, the economy melts down. And that destroys Bermuda's business. For 6 years, people were leaving Bermuda. There was no money there, no jobs. In 2016, John Wright, the president of the Chamber of Commerce in Bermuda, said that 5,000 people, remember, you only have 66,000 people to start with, left the island because of the cash crash and recession. The dockyards fell into a state of deep disrepair. Storms and lack of maintenance caused damage to buildings. But beginning in the 1980s, they decided, let's take this area, King's Wharf, let's let the cruise ships come here, because they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and Hamilton can't support it. Hamilton's basically ferries up to about 800 people on the cruise ship. So let's do something. We'll do something. Turn it into a tourist attraction. Still trying to do that. Welcome, Royal Navy Dockyards. Behind that sign is a prison. But I'll tell you one thing, for the America's Cup, if you tried to walk into town on that road prior to the America's Cup in 2017, you took your life in your hands. You gotta remember, they drive on the opposite side of the roads are narrow, and they give you, see the staircase? It's about 1/3 as big with a sidewalk, but they lengthened it, so it's a lot better. Where culture, history, and adventure want you, or wait you. Several former warehouses were turned into artist shops. they have a cool place where you can get candy in there. They make it and glass in front of you. And a pedestrian mall, and opened in the clock tower building, except the clocks don't work. Here, the clocks don't work. Only one clock works. The Keep is now the site of the Bermuda Maritime Museum and other Dolphin Quest attraction. America's Cup. How many of you follow the America's Cup? Anybody? Well, it used to be a yacht race. I'm going to show you a picture of what the yachts look like, and you tell me if it looks like a yacht race anymore. 2017. Well, you know, the banking industry's gone. Yeah, the tourism's good, but the people who come on the cruise ships don't spend any money here. They buy ferry tickets. They could go back. They're not eating at our restaurants because our prices are so high. They're not shopping anywhere. I mean, what are you going to shop for? You're on a cruise ship, right? So you don't need to shop. If you have the need to spend a lot of money on shopping, you can do that on the cruise ship just as easily. So they decide, you know what? Maybe we'll bring the America's Cup to Bermuda, and maybe, just maybe, that will attract people not only to visit, but to invest in Bermuda. Why Bermuda? Well, Bermuda was asked if the company or the country was interested, and they were willing to spend tens of millions of dollars, as much as $77 million US, to host the event. And the event should have been held off of the waters of San Diego, San Francisco, or in Lake Michigan. Well, it wasn't, because money talks, and the people who run the America's Cup said, oh yeah, sure, let's take it. Now you tell me those are yachts. You tell me those are yachts.
Sailboats.
Well, there's a little sailboat next to that. But inside, there's no rowing anymore.
Catboats.
It's no rowing. What's inside is you're riding a bicycle. You're riding a bicycle on water. That's what you're doing now. You're not really rowing the whole spirit. But anyway, so that's the Oracle. Who is the one who owns that? I can't think of his name right now, but he's one of the richest guys in the world, and he runs the Oracle team. Larry Ellison, that's his name, Larry Ellison. So, 2013, they're awarding this thing, and Larry Ellison's boat, the Oracle, wins, so the United States has the right to host the next America's Cup. But it doesn't happen, because Chicago and San Francisco and San Diego say, I'll just spend this kind of money. There's a guy by the name of Russell Kautz of the America's Cup Event Authority, and he has an idea. Let's go to Bermuda. Let's check it out. Let's see if they're interested. And he's going to sell the rights to the highest bidder, because they become the highest bidder. Bermuda got the rights in a complex deal that included building an America's Cup village in the Royal Dockyards. 2014, Cox says, the American bids, they're not good. Oh, Bermuda? Yeah, they have a long recession. Tourism has fallen off. There's a deal to be made. And the local Bermudan said, sure, let's roll the dice on this. They thought having a high-end sporting event, which attracts people with a lot of disposable money, an awful lot of disposable money, there'd be a trickle-down effect. And it would go to the local people, but not only that, tourism would pick up, because these folks would return all the time to the British territory long after the event is gone. Tourism would rise to the proper levels. Of course, now, you know, they're still competing with the Caribbean, they're still competing with Las Vegas, and they don't have casinos in Bermuda. And they did come. They did come. And, you know, Larry Ellison's boat is over there, that's a yacht there, and there's another yacht there. So the owners of these teams came, but they left. They came and they left. The cruise came for about a year and a half. They lived there to get used to the waters. After the event, they're all gone. They're all gone. Bermuda says, yeah, we'll pay for, it's 15 million bucks to enter this race. We'll pay for it. We'll pay for it. And you know what? We'll get you $25 million in sponsorship. If we don't get that, we'll pay for that too. We get a certain percentage of any thing Bermuda introduces. So there's a clawback that guarantees, and that's already happening, said Grant Gibbons, the Bermuda Minister of Economic Development. Tourism wasn't enough. You can't sell people to go to a beach like that anymore. You just can't sell. That's what they thought. But there are so many beaches in the Caribbean. The island's resorts were filled in mid-May of 2017. I was there too during that time. The America's Cup brought in well-heeled people. But would it bring back tourists after 2018? That's the big question. And beyond, nobody foresaw a COVID-19 outbreak. Bermuda rolled out the red carpet for tourists and for the 6 teams, hoping that those workers would come back. Bermuda is more than a boat race. You go to the beaches. So now we get to the selling of Bermuda. Can't sell that, sell the America's Cup. We see the America's Cup as a bridge to a new opportunity, a reset of the way Bermuda is viewed as a tourism event in first world jurisdiction, said Michael Winfield, Chief Executive Officer of America's Cup Bermuda, which organized the event. This isn't enough, seeing the reefs. You ever see the reefs? They're gorgeous. They're absolutely, and they're well protected too. Not enough. The tourism problem, the competition from the Caribbean, shift of thinking from tourism to finance. And only 10% of the Bermuda economy was dedicated to tourism when the market crashed in 2008. He was not wearing Bermuda shorts that day. He was not wearing Bermuda shorts that day. Gibbons claimed the America's Cup would be the silver bullet that would hit target in time to save Bermuda's economy. He is the shadow minister of economic development, as he told Parliament. He said that the island's economy would continue to struggle if it had not been for the money-spinning international sailing event. Okay, that's what it looked like in 2017. See, all the crews are there, and they got the boats there, and they're spending money there, these guys. These guys are spending money there, 2017. That's what it looked like in 2018. Nothing. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You can walk on those piers. Doesn't really matter. There is nothing there. Again, take a look. There is nothing there except that crane ready to knock down whatever is left of that shell. 2019, this is what was left of the America's Cup. The winning boat, or actually that wasn't the winning boat, that was the runner-up boat. That is the Oracle in front of the mall. And people look up and say, what is that? That's a sailboat, right? It did nothing. And then COVID-19 hit. And when COVID-19 hits, that's the end of that. Sailing, sailing, sailing as always. I mean, those are real sailboats. That's what you do in Bermuda. You sail, you play golf, you go to the beaches and spend an exorbitant amount of money for hotels and also for food. But Michael Bloomberg can afford that. There was a rise in tourism in 2018, brief rise in tourism. But nobody knows if that was because of the America's Cup. COVID-19, of course, has not helped, and Bermuda is still struggling financially. By the way, that is what the inside of the America's Cup boat race looked like. And you probably can't see it all that well, but there are bicycle pedals in there. That's how they sail these days. And that's sitting in a pit over in King Barf, as Max calls it. And it was left there. They had no use for it. The next America's Cup is in New Zealand. And this one is history. And did it change Bermuda? No. Still empty in 2019. That's what $77 million will get you. Still empty. So what is ahead for Bermuda as we wrap this thing up? Well, in the early 21st century, independence for Great Britain was an issue. And the government established a commission in 2004 to discuss the procedures which independence might be achieved. The commission issued its formal report in 2005, but the idea of cutting ties with England didn't have much support from citizens. And it's the same thing in the Caribbean and Puerto Rico. Should we become a state? Should we stay a territory? Should we become independent? Virgin Islands is happy with what they are. But I was talking to a guy, San Juan, a number of years ago. He said, we go independent. Take a look at those other countries that have gone independent. We're better off being a territory. So he said, and that's what is facing Bermuda. Oh, this guy. We leave with this guy. And again, it's Tom's Museum. Except he was taken away. His owner came back to get him. This guy spoke with a British accent. He said, good morning. And he spoke to you, and you would, I was tempted to say, well, what time is tea being served today? Anyway, thank you so much. Any questions, any comments? The floor is all yours. Where are the lights here?
Yeah.
Go ahead.